Hi, I'm Deanna James. I'm a painterly tattoo artist and the owner of Eden Body Art Studios here in Dallas, Texas. For years, I struggled with being able to separate sections and utilizing the fall of light in my own work. And what I discovered is that it always comes down to one common mistake. So today, I'm going to critique 3 tattoos that all have this issue. For each one, I'm going to show you why it's happening, and then I'm going to show you the exact adjustment of what to do to fix it. Let's get started. I'm really excited to critique this piece because it's a style that's very different from mine. So as we know, my stuff is very kind of painterly, I guess, realistic, and this is Neotrad, or a subgenre of Neotrad. I think it's a bit more because there's definitely illustrative elements to it, but either way, it's different from what I usually do, which is so exciting to critique because I think what I'm able to teach can apply to any kind of style. So I'm going to show you exactly how you can apply some of the way that I teach and some of my techniques into what you do, even if you do something very different from me. I'm really excited to critique this piece because it's very different than what I do. And so I'm able to show everybody out there that no matter what style you do, there's something that you could take from any of my seminars or any of my teachings, really. So I'm going to talk about the fall of light with this piece, and it's something that, again, can be applied to any tattoo, no matter what kind of tattoo you do. This piece already is compositionally beautiful. I think there's great flow. The hand really fills up this spot while also being a bit at an angle, but not too much of an angle that it kind of goes outside the parameters of what you are able to see when you look at the arm. I love the flow. It really draws your eye from the top corner of the piece down to the bottom opposite corner. The one thing that I would really push though, again, fall of light, having the highest point somewhere where you feel like the point is at its highest, where the light is hitting it, usually towards the top one side or the other of an image, and everything coming away from that is not as bright as that highest point. So that really gives a dramatic look, that chiaroscuro look. Even if it's not too drastic, I'm gonna show you even just how like some subtle changes can really pop that out. So I'm gonna take some more depth, some more darkness, and apply it around a lot of this area just to push things back. First thing I think of is that background. It's a bright blue, which I love. I think it's great to have some sort of mid-tone in the background. A lot of people may say or ask me, what color do I put in the background? A few things to know. Whatever color you put in the background, I would make sure that it at least makes sense for the subject that is sitting in that environment, because you want it to look like that subject is sitting there inside that environment. So some of the light reflection may be around the outside edges. So I would just make sure that there is a color in the background that is inside your subject matter, even if it's a little bit. Secondly, you gotta make sure it's a mid-tone, whether that's a dark mid-tone or a light mid-tone. As long as it's a mid-tone, because atmospheric perspective talks about the further back you go, the more lighter things get and the more muted things get. Another rule of thumb too, cool colors, cool tone colors and temperature brings things back, while warm tones brings things forward. Now the background, I love breaking these rules sometimes. I think all rules are meant to be broken a little bit, especially after learning the fundamentals. But I think if we just dim down this background a bit, because this background is still very close to the value of the hand in front of it. But before I go over it, actually, I just kind of want to show an example. So I'm going to place that here. I'm going to place this here. And when we take these, we see how similar they are. And usually I like a bigger difference from the subject matter to that background. Again, doesn't have to be all the time, but let me show you what it would look like if it were in this case. First things first, let me dim this down. And this kind of thing, it's what I really like when I was trying to think of a curriculum, and I guess not necessarily rules to follow, but something like that, because that helps me just to know like a set of what works and what doesn't. I think that helps me and also helps me teach, especially to people who are newer. When I was looking at pieces that I really loved in paintings, I noticed how dramatic the dark backgrounds were. And those are the paintings I really gravitated towards. For people who want to be inspired and are finding that inspiration, don't just look at those things that inspire you, but write down all the points to what draws you to that piece, whether it's architecture, graphite drawing, an oil painting, a movie, whatever, to really go further than just being like, I like this, but actually write it down and see how you can apply it to your own work. So again, one of the things I notice is I just love that dramatic lighting. All right, so just dimming down that background, even that brings that hand out further. I also love this person's choice of bringing some cool tones around the outside edges. That's brilliant. That really makes it look like that this hand is sitting in that environment. And I also want to push this hand back further. So with this hand, and I've seen the design reference and the original reference as well, based off of a real hand, I noticed that the light is coming in, let's say, well, we look at the shadows, right? It's coming a lot of the times kind of like sideways here, I would say. So keeping that in mind, this is what visually, I'm gonna show you guys what I'm keeping in mind actually. So visually, that's what I'm keeping in mind. Darkening everything else, finding that highest point and really giving that dramatic effect. So going back to this, I'm gonna take a darker skin color here in the shadow. I kind of want to deepen it a bit more, and I'm going to add that all around here. So even adding this little bit of shadow just to show that this hand is inside this section. And that's also what I'm trying to think is separating sections. I want to separate the hand from the background, from the design elements, from the paintbrush to the flowers. Everything I want a separate value, part of the value scale. So I want my lightest and darkest points to always be in my focal point, which of course is going to be in the hand here. And he's already done I think a great job making sure that all the other parts of this piece and the leaves and the flower, they don't have any highlights on there, which is great because it really draws the attention towards his hand. So I'm going to do that even more so because I feel like the values in the hand and the values here and this paintbrush are very similar. And I can just fix that by just putting the shadow in here to really make it look like this hand is inside. And I also want to kill all the tones in this part of the hand here to kind of push that back a bit. All right. Bring some of that light back in here. All right, and we already have a pretty big difference here. I also am a big fan of softening edges. This is something that, I mean, none of this is totally necessary. It was an amazing tattoo before. This is all just things that I would do, right? One of the things I love to do is softening edges. I think that's part of what gives my work a very soft look, is because I don't just blatantly line edges and have high contrast. I sculpt the edges in kind of softly, and then of course I pack everything as solid as I can up to that soft line. But to make a soft line, you just take your liner and you do what I know I was told not to do when I was first starting out tattooing like 15 years ago. I brush back and forth an edge like this instead of like this. And so it just makes a softer edge that has blurrier ends. So if you were to hypothetically pull a line like this, what I would also do is whenever you take your mag and saturate things, just to go along the edge of that line, just to soften it here. Another thing that I see a lot of artists do is they make reflective light too bright. So here is an example of reflective light right here. And I just toned that down a little bit here. If you make your reflective light too bright, or as bright as the highest point on the other side, then it's gonna flatten out your image. An example is that ball that we all have drawn if you've taken any kind of art class. I'm kind of drawing one right now in reverse since it's on a black background. But we all know this image right here, right? So that ball, this is what we call the core shadow right here. And that's gonna be the darkest part of your shadow. And that reflective light is this part that you usually see. Now, wherever that core shadow is, there's a light and dark side. This is gonna be the dark side. This is gonna be your lighter side. So if this is a core shadow right here, I don't want my reflective light to be as bright as anything on the bright side. So that's why tuning that down even a bit more. I would rather there be no reflective light than a reflective light that's too bright. A lot of the times I've sort of just left reflective light out because I don't think that's what makes or break a realistic picture. What I do think makes or break a realistic picture is not having obvious shapes of light and dark and seeing things in shapes rather than lines, which is what we are used to doing as tattooers, is seeing things in line. When we draw a face, we start out by doing something like this, while a painter would start out a face like this, seeing the shapes and shadows rather than lines. All right, so bring a little bit of warmth back to these shadows too, which is why I always like to mix some type of red in my black whenever I'm doing the values or the underpainting at first. It's because black is really just a dark blue. So I'm just adding a little bit of warmth. I'm gonna brighten up a little bit as well, the highest points. Just gonna be in here, just a little bit. This shadow right here is very, it's muddied down a bit. I just wanna make sure that these shadows have a bit of warmth. The only time shadows are gonna be cool is if your figure or whatever you're doing is outside. So that's a fun fact. Anything inside will have warmer shadows, cooler highlights, and anything outside is gonna have cooler shadows, warmer highlights. And most of the time, your figures are somewhat indoors. So just warming that up a little bit. I also would have not made it as drastic. Again, these are also all my personal preferences, right? There's no real right or wrong, and I know that people told me in the beginning of tattooing what was right and what was wrong, and it took me having to break a lot of those rules in order to figure out how I could fit into the tattoo world instead of forcing it and trying to fit into the box that tattooing wanted me to be in. So I feel like we have a good light and dark. I just want to put a bit more midtones. And if you ever wanted to add blues or greens into your skin tones, they're always going to be, not always, but you would find them a lot in your dark halftones. So the dark halftones, when we go to this circle again, the dark halftones is that section. So here's a core shadow, right? The dark halftones is what comes off of that right there. So the core of the shadow we have seen is about right there. So I would take that greenish tone and I would just brush off of that right in here. Even that is a bit crazy. You can make it a little bit more subtle. And that is an example of the French artist's idea of color sandwiches, where it's warm on top of cool on top of warm on top of cool. And you can see that example without even thinking too much of it. We have your warm shadow, cooler halftone, warmer skin tone, and then eventually a cooler highlight. And you might look at that highlight and be like, how is that cool? Everything is relative. So this highlight only looks cooler when it's placed next to this color right here. And those are the major things that I would do to this piece. You can see the differences. I'm so excited to critique this next piece. It's a black and gray tattoo. Now we could take color completely out of it and I could show you how we can still have that painterly look in black and gray pieces, and even not painterly, but just enhancing black and gray tattoos. Again, everything that I teach, it can apply to any kind of subject matter, any kind of style in tattooing. There is something to give, because everything that I talk about is stuff that I've just learned throughout my years studying art. So the theme kind of to this whole video is fall of light, finding your highest point and letting everything else fall away from that light. A lot of the times too, and I would say 95% of tattooers see things in lines rather than in simplified shapes. And that's something you can get better at just by learning how to paint and only using thicker brushes. Or if you don't have time to paint, practice using only a really thick brush on Procreate, and practice drawing or painting on your iPad a portrait or a flower, anything really, but only using really thick brushes. That's really gonna force you to not see things in tiny little details or lines. So I wanna show an example too. This person also sent their design, so I wanna show you what it looks like if we took the tattoo and the design right up next to each other and zoomed out far away, almost like we're standing from a distance, which again is what we do in painting a lot, so that we don't hyper focus on detail and we see those simple shapes. And this is also why I really admire, and my favorite pieces in the world are not pieces with a lot of detail everywhere, but simple. I like simple subject matter. It's just a smaller amount of things, whether a smaller amount of leaves, smaller amount of flowers. I think there is so much power and maturity and brain power, that it takes to make things more simple. A quote that I like a lot, I forget exactly who said it. I would have written a shorter story, but I didn't have the time to. And I think a lot of that can apply to any kind of art form in the world, but especially in tattooing and in painting. So looking at these two pieces from a distance, almost like squinting your eyes too. So if you're tattooing and you can't look at your tattoo from a distance, just squinting your eyes and seeing if you can see the shapes. We can already see when we bring these even smaller, let's do it even smaller. What is the first thing that you see? I can tell you from me, I see the snake, I see hair, and I see that long spear being dark. And then I see this whole half being light, I see a light shape, and this half being a mid-tone shape. So you have your dark, mid, and light separated into 3 sections. Now when we look over to this other piece, I see mid and light tones here as well as here. Now the torso is obviously a bit lighter than here, but there's so much light still in this image where it should have been toned down. It really flattens the piece and flattens the dimension of it. So let's bring this piece back. If I just took that same concept that I saw when I stood from a distance or blurred my eyes, the first thing I would want to do is make sure that nothing in this section is going to be as bright as anything in this upper section right here. And even toning it down a little bit can make a big difference, as long as it's just not blatant skin tone or your highest point. You can even make it even a little bit more subtle. I also want to bring that just a little bit on the other side of the spear, because I don't want the spear to make it seem like it's splitting the figure half and half, right? So I'm just going to take it over that spear on the other side a little bit. Also with this hand, especially in tattooing, you gotta figure out what is darker or lighter than what's next to it. So if you have a light arm and there's no background, I want to make the arm darker than the background, or vice versa. If you had a dark background, you want the arm to be lighter. So if you don't have something like this to hold that arm, I'm going to darken that arm just a little bit. So I would have killed the tones right in there, just a little bit. And that is also really nice because it separates her from the clothes that she's wearing. So really, again, thinking about separating sections, whether it's separating a flower from its leaves and making sure there's no point in the leaves that is as bright as the brightest point in the flower, or separating clothes from the skin or the hair from the face, things like that. So with the hair, you know, speaking of which, I would have just made sure that all the tones were dimmed down here and that there were no bright highlights here. So now we've done the very basics and just separated into simple sections, right? So now we can kind of play around with the values a little bit further than that. You could just leave it like this. This is why it's important in your design that you take that artistic liberty and change it however you see fit. A great tattoo is something that's readable from a distance. So in order to do that, I gotta tell from a distance what is what. The fabric right now is very close to those legs. So I'm thinking again, do I want the fabric to be lighter or darker than the legs? I'm always thinking about that. What is lighter and darker than what's next to it? So the fabric, the theme of the fabric is that the fabric is lighter than her skin color, or her skin tone, sorry. So I'm just gonna go ahead and just lighten it just a little bit. It's okay if some edges get lost. We call those lost edges or disappearing edges. But when we talk about lost edges, I mean like a small point in an edge. So in this point up here, where that leg goes into this shadow right here, it's okay for that edge right here of that leg to be lost with the shadow in here. That's totally fine. Or when you have a dark side of the face and you lose some of the edges on the outside of the eye, if it's rounding out into shadow, that's also fine. But I'm talking about like larger sections here. So I'm just gonna lighten the fabric a tiny bit. And I just want you to see, again, like how subtle it is. It doesn't have to be a drastic blast over, right? As long as it's just a little bit darker than the brightest point on the bright side of whatever you're tattooing. And now we can also play around with darks too. So with the fabric, I would have made it more of a mid-tone, so I also don't want to put my darkest points in there as well. If I took the darkest points out, so let me just show you. If I just lightened all these points in the fabric right here, look what that does now. Let's clean the edges so it's a bit more visible about what I'm doing. All right, and also this leg gets very, very dark. So my focal point, let's establish that my focal point is in here. So this leg doesn't need as much contrast. And this is the problem that I have with a lot of people who make teaching videos or who do seminars who haven't really put into thought the rules behind what they say. So this person might have heard a lot of people say, oh, it needs more contrast. It needs more contrast. That's the thing I hear the most. But that's what I have with people who talk about, oh, it just needs more contrast, but doesn't tell you where you need more contrast, or tells you like not everything needs a high contrast, right? Your highest contrast should be in your focal point, and everything else is allowed to have a little bit less contrast. So I don't want the bottom of this foot to stick out amongst everything else in the piece, right? So I'm also going to soften this just a little bit, and that's also going to help me separate the leg from the sphere as well. I'm going to bring back some dark right in here because it's a cast shadow, just like over here is a cast shadow. So let's soften the darkness over here. Let's bring back a little bit more darkness in that cast shadow. Cast shadows are fairly dark. The closer the object is to the surface that it's casting a shadow on, the darker it's going to be right at the point where it touches. So right here would be at its darkest. Right here, oh, maybe we have another cast shadow at the point where it's closest. We can darken that. Now, since we've lightened that foot a bit, I'm gonna add a little bit more mid-tone to the fabric right around here, just to bring out that foot a bit more, because the fabric around here is just a little bit too bright. That's the mindset, is just like getting into thinking, when I squint my eyes, can I tell what is what? I'm always thinking and always comparing. Do I want the foot to be lighter or darker than what's behind it, or vice versa? And things can change. So even if the fabric right here is brighter than the skin tone, there are parts where it can be a little bit darker than the skin tone, like where I just put this cast shadow right in here, or if you want that foot to pop out more. And then always just keep checking by moving away and seeing like, what do I need to change? I think I need to darken this. This foot maybe needs to be a little bit brighter than the fabric as it comes down here. Looking in larger shapes, again, I'm not worried about the details just yet, but let me just see what it looks like. Yeah, so what if that changed a bit? And the foot was just a bit lighter as it came down here than the fabric. See, this is me thinking in real time. So yeah, as it comes down here, I'm gonna make the foot feel like a bit brighter. I would also encourage whoever drew this or whoever tattooed this to start seeing things in terms of shape rather than what we know as tattooers, where we're taught to tattoo a line and then shade right off of that without really worrying about where it ends, but instead seeing things as, this is a shape. This probably would have been a shape. This shadow is this shape, instead of thinking line and then brush, line, brushing, right? Simplifying shapes. So then I'm gonna make the fabric a little bit darker around the foot. This leg is inside here, and then it comes out here. I see this shape overall. There we go. Then I see that. And then little things just like anywhere else, like where I talked about shapes and stuff. Because I mean, something that we know that we saw immediately is just how prominent this snake was with this sphere and her hair. And just recognize like why that is so powerful right there, because we were able to separate sections. So this one was a little bit tougher, but now you can hopefully see what my mindset is in trying to decipher what is darker or lighter than the next. And this is our overall difference. So we've worked on a black and gray tattoo and a Neotrad tattoo, and now we're gonna be doing some florals, because everything still applies to even if you're not doing a face or a figure. The fall of light can be so important in any tattoo, also with this. So there's a lot of petals, and I put the design on the side so you can see that there's a lot of petals that are in some form of shadow. Not every petal is gonna have contrast and the highest point of contrast on each one. It's really sort of the moral of the story, I feel, is separating sections and fall of light, and to check those two constantly. You can do that by, when you're designing, zooming out almost like you're looking at it from far away, or with a tattoo, having the client stand and then looking at it from a distance, or if your client can't stand, you can blur your eyes, things like that. With this whole thing, simplifying into two very simple sections: flower, leaf. What is going to be lighter or darker than the next? So typically your leaves are going to be more darker midtones, or your darker subject matter, which means there shouldn't be any highlights in the leaves, because I want that focal point to be on the flower. So when I squint my eyes, or if we really want, let's put this to black and white mode on the iPad. You can kind of see where the leaves are headed, but they're still like, when you compare what the darkest could be, like in the reference photo, you see how light the leaves are compared to the reference. Side note, if you're ever unsure about what a color is, what a value should be, anything like that, compare to what's near it. Just comparing those two, we can see just how close in tones those leaves are to those flowers. In fact, those leaves, I would say, are the same value as these petals, honestly, right in here. So we don't want that. So let's bring this back. First things first, let's make those leaves darker, especially as it gets down here where there's no background or anything to kind of hold that leaf up over time. We want the leaves to be darker than what's behind it for sure. So just dimming these down a bit. You can still have some detail. We don't want too much detail though. Focal point, there's so much that applies to that. So you not only want like your highest contrast or your highest and darkest point to be in your focal point, you want the most amount of detail to be in the focal point as well. I'm not gonna put as much detail into my leaves as I would into the center of my flower. So flowers, a focal point is usually gonna be wherever the center is. Right there and right there. And of course, this is just my iPad, so it's not gonna be as pretty, but we're just looking at the value and just seeing like how much difference there is when you focus on larger shapes of value rather than details. Now let's just push some petals back. So let's take a darker red. Let's bring those petals in shadow. This petal is gonna be behind this one, so I'm gonna darken this one a bit. You have that fall of light, right? So that highest point is right there. So anything else kind of going away from it is not going to be as bright. And then this flower over here, it's facing away from the light, so it's going to be significantly darker. So let's bring some chroma back in. Chroma meaning intensity of a color. Higher chroma colors just means on your Procreate, the closer it is to this corner, the higher chroma it is. I think it's important for me as a teacher to try to explain things in ways people can understand. I think that's the whole point of teaching, right? Or else it's just selfish teaching if you just want to sound smart, you know, in front of people. So just doing those two things, look at the difference it makes. When you squint your eyes, you're able to see the yellow, the red, and the green. You're able to see your dark subject matter, your lighter subject matter. The focal point is right here in the center, so I want high contrast in there. So I'm gonna take a darker yellow or something like this, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of shadow back in here. Maybe taking a little caramel color to darken around here, and then a brighter yellow to bring back the lightest points, which I feel like are about right here. And just like hair, I'm looking at this in sections rather than individual. So you can see that I'm sort of like going around larger groupings rather than going individual like that. Again, seeing things and simplifying things into larger shapes, I think is really important. Now let's bring a little bit of lightness into these petals where we want it. So the lightness looks like it'd be hitting about right there. Let's make it a little bit brighter. And I think it's so unique, like where the light is hitting. And I love that about this design. Great job, whoever did this. And then let's add the focal point of this flower is in the center right here. So I'm gonna add some darkness, especially in the center. So there'll be less contrast further away from the center in anything that you do. And then make sure the detail also is sharper in the focal point. So you want like your highest detail, you want your sharpest edges, you want your higher contrast all in the focal point. That's what makes it dramatic when you look at something. If you have the craziest parts everywhere, it makes part that's supposed to be craziest underwhelming because it's everywhere at that point. I think that applies to any kind of art, like even in TV shows. One of the things me and my husband said when we watched White Lotus, for example, was that there were so many bad things happening all the time. It wasn't as dramatic anymore. Kind of same thing applies here. So yeah, focusing less on details, less on trying to put all the variations in a space like this, all these little shapes and details, and looking at more like this. Now, here we have the difference. So as you can see from all these tattoos, they all fell a little bit flat. And the solution to that is being able to find the fall of light and seeing things in larger sections to create more dimension. I'll be reviewing 3 new tattoos next week, so put the notification bell on to be notified of when that new critique video is uploaded. And one final note, I have something huge that I'm very excited to share with you guys soon. People have been asking me for this for years, and we've been working hard on it since January. In December, I'm dropping a fully online seminar specifically for artists like you who want to take your work to the next level. And the first 100 people to join the seminar will get some incredible bonuses that won't be available to anybody else. I could not be more excited. If you want to be the first to get more info, click the first link in the description below to learn more.